Welcome to Story Chats at Inspy Romance. I'm Elizabeth Madry, and I'm here with my two co-hosts.
I'm Narelle Atkins.
I'm Valerie Comer.
Today we are talking about cowboy romance. So what is it that makes something a cowboy romance? Obviously you need a cowboy, right? But are there other requirements? Like, do they have to be actual cows? Do ranchers who deal with horses, like, is that still cowboy romance? Or what are the hallmarks of a cowboy romance? What makes it cowboy romance? Narelle, what do you think?
Well, when I think of cowboy romance, I probably think of rodeos and things like that. So any animals that can participate in a rodeo
Okay.
would count. Cowboy hats. A cowboy's not a cowboy without a hat. And I remember when I went to San Antonio a few years ago, I went to a Romance Rise of America conference there and actually saw real cowboys walking down the street. It was a bit of a, oh my goodness, they actually exist moment. Because I'm in Australia and we don't have cowboys as such in Australia. We have cattlemen would probably be a description, or jackaroo or jillaroo, but and we have big cattle stations in the outback, which are probably similar to a ranch, but the terminology is totally different here.
Okay. Cool. All right, Valerie, what do you think?
The rodeo thing is interesting. I don't think it needs to have rodeos in it, although some sure do. But the ranch as a setting, I think, is important. Do there need to be cows? Well, a ranch, kind of by definition, usually has horses and cows, and the horses are ridden to round up the cows. Without cows, I'm not sure quite what they would do, but I did actually write one without cows in it. But they had a plan in place for getting cows. They were working towards getting back up and running properly as a ranch. So I think that that cows are pretty important to it, and if there aren't any on whatever ranch, then they need to be out there looking for them.
What if they raise sheep? Big herds of sheep.
That's not it's you use dogs. You have your sheep dogs that round up the sheep.
You still ride horses.
Sometimes. It's would not generally be considered ranching. It would be farming of a sort then, I think.
Sheep farming.
Sheep farming.
Could it be cow farming? I mean, they're still animals.
Because we do, like where I live, we have just a short country road, but there's 2 dairy farms on it. Okay. And so they have cows, and they are not ranches, and they do not have cowboys, and they do not have horses. Okay. But they do have cows. And
but dairy farms, like if you wrote a romance at a dairy farm, it would not be a cowboy romance.
Correct.
Even though there are cows.
Correct.
Okay.
But it could be a cattle station.
It could.
I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. I think it also depends on the landscape as well. Like certain types of climate, and depending on where it is, sheep will run better or cattle will run better. It depends on where you are. So in Australia, we've always been big producers of lamb, wool. I mean, they used to talk about in the 1940s and 50s that we rode on the sheep's back. That was one of our biggest exports.
Sure.
So we've always had sheep around. So sheep is always something I associate with farms. But when I think of ranches, I think of cattle. Okay. This is where my head goes.
What if they raise horses?
That's a horse stud. That's a different name.
All right.
And often you raise horses for race horsing, like race horses, and at a stud. And that's a completely different type of
but more closely related than sheep farming. One of the differences with ranching too is that they tend to put the cattle out to the range, which would be not necessarily mountainous, but often is not prime agricultural land. It's not usually land that you could put a tractor and big equipment on and grow a crop. It doesn't get enough rain, or it's too steep or too rocky or something like that. But the cow can wander around out there and pick at the grass, and then so that's like another thing too. Like a sheep.
Like with sheep, where they take the sheep up to the summer pasture and then they bring them back down.
Yes.
Okay,
Well-
just checking.
Well, let's think about England. So over in England, there's lots of horses.
Mhm.
Okay. And there's horse studs and there's a lot of racing. Could there be a ranch in England?
No.
Yeah.
sorry.
And
Okay.
yeah. And I think that's the difference.
Okay. All right.
But they can have sheep.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So you mentioned terrain, and this isn't on our list of our outline, but like we see cowboys, I primarily in like 2, maybe 3 places. You've got like the Montana, Wyoming,
Right.
you've got Texas,
Right.
and you've got some parts of California. Although I would say that California probably is not, it's going to be farm more than ranch.
Having driven through California a few times, but never having lived there, I don't really see it as ranching country.
They
Mm.
have
But it
ranches
could
with
happen.
horses.
But Oregon is another place where there can be ranches, and Eastern Washington does. But you're right that in fiction, we tend to see them mostly in Montana, Wyoming, and Texas.
Like I'm
And
pretty
Colorado as well. Colorado is
Yeah.
the place that comes to
Colorado, yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like I'm sure Oklahoma and Kansas have cattle farms. They're just probably not considered ranches because they're not in
I
rangeland.
have seen stories,
Okay.
cowboy stories
Cowboys,
set in
okay.
those places, but I think generally speaking, if Montana and Texas would be like shorthand for cowboy story.
Sure.
Where Colorado, excuse me, could be a variety of things.
Yeah.
But if you're just like going straight for a cowboy thing, then if you say Montana, they're like, oh, I have a picture in my head. I know what that would be, or Texas.
Okay. So no cowboys in Australia, Narelle.
Well, we don't use the same terminology,
Okay.
and so we obviously have people that ride horses and round up cattle, but the traditional terminology here has been cattleman or cattle lady, or as I said, it's more the Jillaroo, Jackaroo type thing, and we probably had more sheep than cattle in terms of the mix of agriculture, and so shearers were probably a big job that people did, and the shearers are probably more in if you go back and look at some of the poetry from Banjo Patterson, the man from Snowy River was in the mountains.
That's
he
what
wasn't
I was thinking of. Was the
he
man from
wasn't
Snowy
rounding
River.
cattle. He had with the Brumbies, the wild horses, and and it's just, I think it relates to our landscape. We've got most of the populations around the coast, then we've got the mountain range, and then we sort of have some land in the north, but that's it's very outback where the cattle is. You'll see more sheep when you're sort of around the coastal areas, but then it depends on and then if we're not counting dairies is where you'll see a lot of cattle as well. Like if you go down to the Bega Valley in New South Wales, that's a big dairy area, a lot in Victoria as well. So it just depends, but we just don't have that cowboy culture. Akubra hats are probably the thing that our people on the farms wear. That's what would be our cowboy hat equivalent.
Okay.
That term cowboy culture makes sense, and that's what I was meaning about the Montana, Texas thing as well.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
cowboy culture that we associate there.
Okay. I can go with that. I was thinking, also like Argentina's sort of known for their beef. So clearly they have big beef raising, and you have the vaquero, and but that's very different from the cowboy. Even though probably their role is essentially the same.
Similar. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, the regionality of it.
Yeah.
But another difference though is in Australia, we don't tend to have the small towns.
Mhm.
Like, so in Texas and Montana, you've got ranches that tend to have a small town nearby. That's what we see in fiction anyway.
Sure.
But if you go to where all the cattle's run in Australia, where you're we're in the mostly the northern part of the country, and it's very sparsely populated compared to the east and the southeast where most people live. So we don't sort of have the same small town thing going that is happening. And I think we just got less people. Our population's, what,
Sure.
25 million-ish roundabouts, which is a lot smaller than the States. So we just have less people living in the country compared to the city, or living on the coast compared to living inland. And I think that makes a difference as well in terms of culture.
I can see that. That works. All right. So, what is the appeal of the cowboy? Why do you think cowboy romances are so popular? Narelle, what do you think?
Well, I think one thing you'll always see, you rarely see a lazy cowboy when you read a cowboy romance. They're men and women who are very hardworking. They're getting up when the sun comes up. They're outdoors in all different types of weather. They're very hardy people, strong people, muscular, earthy, and usually they don't have a whole lot of airs and graces. And they may be wealthy in terms of the ranch might be very successful. And if I look at Australia, a lot of the people who have made a lot of money in our country, it's been either mining or agriculture is where that old money's come from for the families that are in those dynasties. Yeah. So I think it's the appeal of just, and I also think it's something different. So often we romanticize something that we don't have, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of appeal to, wouldn't it be nice to go out and just be on a horse riding around the countryside, admiring the beauty and nature of the world, away from the stress and bustle and hustle of the city.
Okay. All right, Valerie, what do you think?
I think cowboy romance is popular because cowboys epitomize masculinity and a really solid work ethic, like Narelle mentioned. They're not afraid to get in and get dirty, and they're not even afraid to get hurt if that's what it needs to get the job done. And I think it's refreshing because in today's world, a lot of times men are put in a more genteel kind of box. And so it's refreshing for a lot of readers to see men like being men and showing their strength, whether it's physical strength or emotional strength or whatever, but that there's something appealing about seeing, I'm going to say, men in their natural habitat.
Interesting. All right. So I think I've mentioned before on the podcast that cowboy romances are not necessarily my jam. So for me, it was a legitimate question because I don't really get the appeal of the cowboy. I think about the smell of cows all over the Cowboys. And I think of the smell of having ridden a horse for like a couple hours in an afternoon. And this is like your day is you are out riding a horse around cows. And I'm just like,
you don't want to go close and sniff that, huh?
I don't, you can shower really, really well before you come home and kiss me because I'm not interested in that at all. And you're doing your own laundry because I'm not interested in that at all. That just doesn't appeal to me at all. And I think of like the John Wayne movies that my grandfather loved with the sort of obnoxious bordering on toxic masculinity of, yo there, little lady, let me handle this. It's like, no, I don't need you to handle this for me. I can handle myself. You go find a cow. I just don't. They seem like just the epitome of nothing that I would want in a man. So it's fascinating to me because this is not my oeuvre at all.
Isn't it interesting that there are so many kinds of romance novels, as there are many kinds of people in this world, and there's room for all kinds. And so I love the cowboy romance, but if you don't, there's so many other really cool stories and settings and people that you can read about, write about, and we don't all have to like the same thing, and that's good.
That is
good for readers and writers. Yeah.
But when you read about it, you don't have to think about the smell.
I can't get away from it
because you're not there.
I can't. I'm like, You have how many cows that you are shuttling around today? That sounds just no.
Too funny.
No, doesn't work for me. I would like, but see, like I write about geeky programmers, and there are a lot of people who are like, that sounds incredibly boring. And it might, I mean, compared to like smelling like cow, it is incredibly boring. And I will take boring any day over smelling like a cow. So yeah, I mean, I do love the romance of the West, like the setting, because I grew up in the Southwest and I do love that. But I feel like there's so much more to the west of the United States than just cowboys. So sometimes I feel like it's a little sad that Texas gets lumped in like land of cowboy. Because Texas is amazing. It's got some amazing stuff, but also apparently cowboys. So
Apparently.
apparently. So let's talk specific books. The best cowboy romances you've read, and we talked ahead of time. I read 2 different cowboy series, so you guys know that those are mine. And you guys have to broaden everyone's spectrums a little bit. Narelle, let's start with you.
Okay, well, it's very hard to pick. So I don't know if I'd necessarily say favorite. So, I mean, Valerie and Deb Kastner are 2 authors I read for Cowboys, but I haven't specifically chosen to talk about their books today because, you've only got so many you can talk about. But the first one I'm going to talk about, I actually have it here for you, is Shannon Taylor Vannatter's love-inspired book, Hill Country Redemption. So that's a secret baby second chances story. So the heroine fell pregnant and ended up moving to Dallas, Fort Worth area. And the hero was a ranch hand and wasn't good enough for her, according to her family. And he didn't find out that he had a child until she comes back, and the child looks like she's 5 or 6, but she's actually 7. So I really enjoyed that story, and I am fussy with Secret Baby. Secret Baby has to have very good motivation to hook me into it, and Shannon did that really well. And I really loved watching the cowboy daddy, and I think there's something about cowboys and babies that always pulls my heartstrings. So I think they just are such a really good match. And I really enjoyed watching the romance develop in this story, and also the daughter and the father bonding, and also the daughter bonding with her paternal grandparents, because the heroine's back in town because her father's passed away and the ranch is in trouble, and she's setting up a rodeo, which ticks another box for me because I often like seeing rodeos because that's something completely foreign to me in Australia. And I've never ever been to a rodeo in real life. So I enjoy that through reading books. Yeah, so I really enjoyed that story, and I like Shannon's books. I've been reading her books for a long time as well.
I found that one interesting as well, because I think we talked about a bit ago that having a rodeo in the story is for me, it's a bonus. It's not like required of a cowboy book. But Shannon has obviously done a lot of research into how one would start a rodeo. And I found that whole process through her story really well researched. Well, I think so. It seemed very believable to me. I've never tried to start one, so I don't know for sure. But the whole process was fascinating as a way of them needing to interact with each other. And then the fact that the guy, whose name was Rance, just he's like, okay, this is my child, I'm gonna like do all the daddy things. And she's like, wait a minute, I've been doing this for 7 years, back off, buddy, let's take a little bit of time to figure out roles. And he's like, no, I'm all in. And she's like, no. So the secret baby part of that one was interesting as well.
Yeah, and the faith element was also very good. If you're looking for a love inspired with a strong faith element, Shannon's books generally tick that box as well. And I really enjoyed that aspect of the story.
So I have mentioned Mandi Blake's Blackwater Ranch books before. She's one of 2 ongoing cowboy series that I actually will read. Book 1 of that series is Remembering the Cowboy, and it's an amnesia trope.
Too.
What?
It's on my list.
Oh, yeah.
And mine.
Oh, well, then we should be able to talk about it just
That's
fine.
right.
Yes.
It's an amnesia trope, which is tricky. to do well, I think. I was telling someone I just finished an amnesia book, writing one, and I was telling someone, and I can't remember who, that quicksand and amnesia are a lot less prevalent in my life than I feel like I was led to believe that they would be from the cartoons I watched growing up. I was like, if you weren't getting sucked into quicksand or having amnesia, then that there was no story. It felt like in the early 80s, but just doesn't seem to actually happen in real life. So amnesia can
Thankfully.
be, yeah, thankfully, amnesia can be tricky, I feel like. And I thought she did it very nicely. But it kicks off the series well. And amusingly, I like the series because it's not super focused on all the cowboy the cowboy stuff. It's like they fix some fences, and they say, oh, I have to.
Happy.
Yeah, it's not. I don't have to go on a cattle drive with them as part of the story. There's much more in town or just around the around the ranch. And it's not so much about the stinky gross work that they do as it is just, they happen to also be cowboys.
It's about the relationship.
Yeah.
And that's something that I was thinking about, having just read that one of Shannon's that you mentioned, Narelle. I read it this
Yep.
past week. And it was very focused on all the things at the ranch and all the ranching things, right? And I thought about my own cowboy stories. And I thought, I think it's the difference between mine. I shouldn't speak for Shannon, but mine are very character driven. I don't plot a whole lot. So I just throw a couple characters in there, and one of them happens to be a cowboy and lives on the ranch. And sometimes the ranching, cowboying, riding horses is a very minor, very, very minor part of the story. It's setting, but not necessarily the whole thing. And that, I think, is with Mandi's as well.
Well, that's probably why yours is the other cowboy series that I read. Is
Okay.
Valerie's, the Saddle Springs and the Cavanaugh Cowboys. The Cavanaugh ones are a little more ranchy because they're not in town. Saddle Springs is closer to town, and so
Yeah.
you get more town and that sort of thing. The Cavanaugh, they're sort of out on the ranch, so you do tend to have a few more ranchy details in there. But
Until you read book 3, which is very unranchy.
yeah, but
And
it's
it's
not.
coming soon.
None of them are overwhelming, which is good,
Yeah.
because again, to me, that's not a draw for me. Is overwhelming cattle ranching detail.
I hear you. I just hope it ticks enough of the boxes for those who love cowboy romance to think, I have now read a cowboy romance with.
I think it does,
Anyway.
because I don't walk away thinking I read anything other than a cowboy romance. It's I mean, I don't think it's small town or anything. It's clearly cowboy romance. It's
Not
just
urban.
no, it's just cowboy romance, but it's not like all cows all the time. Which, I mean, I don't know that any others are, because I haven't read them. I
There's
haven't
my
read them
new
either.
motto.
So I
All
don't know.
cows all the time.
That could be
Like,
somebody's tagline. You're welcome to have it. All cows all the time.
I'll make that.
But that could also very much backfire when you think about the other way that could be thought of.
True.
But it's interesting because Mandi's book that you just mentioned, Remembering the Cowboy, is an amnesia, and it's a best friends from way back when, and then amnesia thing. And the first one, the other one that I was thinking about was Deb Kastner's Her Forgotten Cowboy, which is also an amnesia trope. They had been married, and now she's back. So there's a whole, like, what happened, right? She returns pregnant, and she's back at the ranch trying to remember what happened. So of course there's this tragic reason why they separated that he knows, but he doesn't want to just like up and tell her because she'll run again. So it's pretty interesting, but there's a fair bit of ranchiness in that one. But again, it's far more focused on the relationship between the two people. And I'm not saying that means that Shannon's didn't have a lot of the relationship. It did. It was just far more focused, the relationship as per the rodeo.
You got the details in there.
Yeah.
I will say, like, if you're riding a horse and dealing with cows, TBIs seem like they would be much more common or possible. So, maybe amnesia and cowboys go well together because of all the potential head injuries.
But it isn't always the cowboy getting it. It's often the other person.
True. Yeah. Mandy's was the heroine, so I can't blame the cows.
Yeah.
Narelle, what's another one you have?
Well, I also had Remembering the Cowboy, and I read it a while ago. Yes, I think I mentioned in an earlier episode that I just started reading the book. So, and I read it really quickly because I loved it, which means my details are a bit sketchy now because it's a while ago since I last read it. But what I liked about that one is not only was he a cowboy, he was a firefighter. Mm-hmm. So that's like a double tick from me. And the way that they end up meeting again is not on a ranch either. So that probably ticks boxes for Beth.
Yeah.
With those elements of the story. So that what was really interesting was he had both jobs. So he worked on the ranch and he also had the firefighting job that he did. I think he had 2 days on and 4 days off or something like that, some roster like that. And so that was really interesting. But what I really liked about that book was the close family connections, which we talked about. So I think if you're looking at a community like a ranch or a farm, then you really have nowhere to go in terms of seeing people in person, but the people you're working with, living with, that are often family members. So I think there's always a lot to explore and unpack with that. And that's one of the reasons I love Valerie's cowboy books, is that I think she does that really well. Agreed. She brings in characters into the earlier books that we then get to see what's happening in their lives before they get their story. And that's something I think that's really fun, to actually watch a character. And she also does this in the Urban Farm Fresh series too. It's not just in the ranch books, but to actually watch a character start often from a really bad place, mm-hmm. and see that in the earlier books, and then see them get their stories. And then you get to see afterwards what happens as well. If it's a book in the middle of the series, you might see a wedding and you might see the couple have children. And I think that whole sense of community is really fun. And I think you often see that in cowboy books as well. And it's often people looking for home, those themes of belonging, yeah. and all that kind of stuff's often drawn out as well.
Yep, absolutely. Do you have another, Valerie?
I think that we've pretty much covered the Mandys and Debs and Shannons that I had written down.
Okay.
But I think one thing I've found with cowboy books in general is that they're, I'm going to say guilty, which means I'm guilty, of being very focused on trope, especially in the last 3-4 years in particular. You're seeing a lot more of that than perhaps in earlier ones. And that makes them also very fun or very not fun, depending on which tropes you like or don't like, right?
Sure.
If you are not a happy person with Secret Baby, which, as we've said before and today, it's a tricky one to get right. Mm-hmm. Or if you don't like amnesia stories, or if you don't like whatever, the cowboy stories these days tend to really be full of those tropes, because some readers really, really, really love them. Yeah. And if you're one of the ones that doesn't, then it's going to be a little harder to find on point cowboy stories currently being published.
True. Yep.
I think Love Inspired for many, many years has, I think, done well with the cowboy stories. If I was just thinking I want to find a cowboy book that I know I'm going to enjoy, I'm pretty much guaranteed that if I pick up a Love Inspired book that I'll enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And I think they pretty much deliver sort of center of that sort of trope niche in terms of the way the stories are written as well. And that's where
a while. Yeah.
Pardon?
They have been doing that for a while.
Yes.
Multiple years, probably 10 at least.
Yeah.
Where, and they're fairly trope centered as well.
Yeah. If you don't mind tripping over into romantic suspense lightly, Susan May Warren has a couple 4-book series that are cowboy-ish, and I like them because they're cowboy-ish, but they're more romantic suspense. I I like the ish, I think, with the cowboy rather than the full on. But I kind of feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't mention those, just because they have been very popular in the last year and a half, 2 years. And don't ask me the names. I'll look them up. I'll put them in the notes. I think one is named Wyatt. They're like the names of the character.
Yep.
The last one is Ruby because it's the sister, and I like that because it's like a cowgirl, which is
Right.
unique.
That was going to be my next question. So I really like the cowgirls. I like it when the girls are out there doing what the boys do as well. So Beth, if it was a cowgirl series as opposed to a cowboy series, would you be more likely or less likely to read it?
I think the cows still stink.
It would, I mean, honestly, it would depend probably on who the heroes are, because I don't know who's going to fall in love with a cowgirl. Like, is an accountant going to marry a cowgirl?
You can run the books of the ranch. That works.
That yeah, maybe. But more than likely, she's probably going to find some big strapping alpha male who treats her like dirt that she has to like kick into submission or something. I don't know. I don't like alpha males either. We've talked about that. So, I don't know.
Not all cowboys are alpha males though. And that's another trend I've noticed, is that once upon a time, I would agree with you that most cowboys tended towards the alpha, but I think there's many beta cowboys, many beaters.
Yeah. Although when we were first talking about what made them the appeal, Valerie's thing is that it's men being men, which is kind of,
They can be men quietly. They can still be introverts. They can still be gentle on the land.
Yeah.
But there's such a draw though. If you're on the land and you're out with cattle, you're by yourself, that's introvert heaven. Yeah. So if you're an extrovert, that's not the kind of job you're going to be looking for unless the cows talk back to you.
Maybe they do.
Let's hope they don't.
I think I would be more interested in a cowgirl series, but I suspect from a sales standpoint, it would be tricky because with romance, generally speaking, your reader wants to imagine herself with the hero. So it's going to, again, depend on who the hero is and whether they can identify with the heroine enough as a cowgirl. I don't know. And I don't know that many, girls grow up dreaming of being cowgirls. Maybe they do. I did not.
Ranch Kids might.
Ranch Kids might.
Another series that I was just thinking of now while we were talking was one by Ruth, Logan, Herne, and it's a double S Ranch or something in Eastern Washington. And the books there are Back in the Saddle is one, but I don't think that's the first one.
I'll figure it out.
And I really enjoyed those. They're longer than Love Inspired, or longer than the ones that I write or that Mandi does. But it's again 3 brothers, and it's not 3 little boys who grew up on the ranch who always wanted to stay there and take over. One of them comes back from Wall Street. One of them was the guy who stayed, and one was a country singer who came home. So there's 3 different angles to that one. And I listened to those in audio, which is why it took me a few minutes to find them on my phone. I was like, why are they not coming up? Oh, right. They're on my Audible app. So they were, it was a good series too, with a little bit less of a focus on the ranchy bits and the cows.
Okay, cool. All right. Final cowboy thoughts.
Ride into the sunset.
Okay.
Keep writing them. I'll keep reading them.
Okay. Exactly. We would love to hear from you. Let us know what you think about all things cowboy romance. Any of these things that we've touched on, let us know what you think. And if we missed your favorite cowboy book, please let us know, because Narelle and Valerie for sure want to read it, and I'll go read the blurb and think about it. So Thank you, everyone, for joining us at Story Chats. You can find all the information about the podcast at inspiromance.com/storychats. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. In the meantime, we'll see you next week. So don't forget to fall in love with a good book. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.